And I'm going to turn your volume down for a minute. So, hey, everybody, welcome to My Alien Life. I'm Cam Logan, and tonight my special guest is Russell Brinegar. And it's been problematic this evening. I'm not sure why that is from time to time, but let's start the show.
This is Whitley Strieber, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
I got about half a battery. I need a charge cord.
All right. Russell's going to run and get a charger. Thank you, Russell. So this is live. Please, if you have questions, we're not going to be able to call them in tonight. If you would message on Facebook Messenger, message on Facebook Messenger, or you can message on YouTube. And my guest tonight is Russell. How are you, Russell?
I'm good.
So let everybody know where you're calling in from. And unfortunately, we don't get to see your beautiful face tonight. But
okay.
You're live on YouTube.
Okay. Well, I'm calling from Newcastle, Indiana. And weather just changed. We're busy scraping up leaves so the leaf truck will come by.
Yeah, it's been high winds across the country, just west of me today, over 100 miles per hour. Not too bad where I'm at, luckily. And so been a decent winter so far. We've had 61 degrees today, 70s down through Colorado. And not that I want to do the weather, but it's pretty amazing. If you'd stand by, Russell, I want to just send a message out to everybody that they can comment on YouTube.
Okay. Since they can't see me, I'll go get a charge cord.
Go ahead.
I can still hear you.
So welcome everybody, and sorry this has been such a pain tonight, but I already had 3 or 4 phone calls, and I'm not used to that until we actually get into the episode. So it was pretty amazing that actually happened, and I want to share this, so get that rolling as well, and appreciate everybody checking in tonight. Wednesday night, supposed to be on time at 7 p.m., but running a little late tonight, and I apologize for that. So still ironing out some problems. We were able to get a hold of Russell on his phone, which is fantastic. Technology, both of us brainstorming like crazy. And if you have a question, please put it in the comments and we'll get to you. You can also ask questions via YouTube, and that would be amazing if we could do that. And I know Russ is listening. We're just trying to get our mess all patched up here. Are we good to go, Russ?
Yes.
Okay. So you know what? You're on. I don't even know how long ago it was. It was quite some time ago, and I wanted to have you back because I love your book, and I revisit that from time to time. One of the things I like about it is you cover a vast variety of different things that made me think, and things that I would have never thought of. So, just really quickly, if you would revisit why you started writing that book and what sparked that, or you had quite an experience in the past, and exactly what happened, and then what prompted you to write the book.
Okay. I've always, I grew up on the Space Coast down in Florida. I've always been kind of a hard science guy. And I was in sales for about a decade and a half. And then I left that for a second career after college for 4 years. I graduated at the age of 42 for a second career in occupational therapy. And I did that until I was 54 years old. And I always considered myself, I never thought much about UFOs or the paranormal. I held the traditional material reductionist physicalist view where your consciousness and mind is a epiphenomenon of the brain. And when your brain goes, it's just over, eternal. And as far as UFOs go, I was one of these guys that said, you can't get here from there. It's not possible. And even if there are civilizations out there, we'll never see them. And on August the 18th of 2009, I went home to mow my grass during lunch. I was a rehab manager for a local nursing home as an occupational therapist. And I'm going to give the short version of what happened. When I started up my lawnmower, I felt extremely fatigued. So that's the first thing I thought was I was dehydrated. So I went inside. And the bottom line is when I came back out and started to mow her up, it came over me again. And I realized what was happening. I was having a heart attack. And I considered myself, agnostic. I was brought up fundamentalist Christian, but I got away from that, through personal studies. In fact, in 2000, I wrote a book called Outgrowing the Bible, the journey from fundamentalism to free thinking, going into all the biblical origins of the Old Testament stories and whatnot. And one thing I like about that is that in 2021, the subject matter that I covered in that book is very popular. You've got scholars like Bart Ehrman and Dan Barker and David Fitzgerald out there, Aaron Ra, saying basically the same thing. So it might have been a little 20 years ahead of its time. It wasn't as popular back then as the subject matter is now. But when I was in the yard and I realized I was having a heart attack, the emotion that came over me was curiosity, because I was really curious if I was correct, that I would just black out like I was being put under for anesthesia. And the only difference is I'd never wake up. And to my surprise, um, I was looking around for a place to lay down and pass away because I knew I was going. And to my surprise, I wasn't alone all of a sudden. There were several entities there in the yard with me in sort of an etheric form. If you've ever seen the movie Predator, you know what I mean. It's just like you can barely make out an outline. But I had a positive ID on several of these individuals. And so I wasn't alone. And I just considered myself crossing the veil, or however you want to put it, that I was dying. And the way that it felt was very similar to when you wake up in the morning from a dream and then you suddenly realize that you're back into this reality, that we're sort of connected to a larger reality than the one that we're in now. And there's a lot going on over there on the other side. So I realized that there was something after this physical life. And I sort of got a mental download real quick. It was like a choice. And I would learn later on in the NDE material that this is a common thing for people to experience, is the choice of staying alive or not. So they basically set this group of entities collectively sort of sent me a mental message that I can either cross the veil and be with them and they would welcome me, or I could choose to stay alive a little bit longer. So I thought about it for an indefinite period of time. I don't know how long it actually took. It might have just been a split second, but I went inside and got my keys and I actually drove myself to the hospital. But the bottom line on that whole experience was the doctors, I had to get an ambulance ride from Henry County here up to Muncie, Indiana, which is about 40 minutes away. And they gave me a choice of a quadruple bypass or two stents. So I got the two stents. And strangely, one of the entities that showed up with me in my yard was a woman that I had dated for about 3 years and broke up with because she wanted to get married and I didn't. We went our separate ways. And when they rolled me out from getting the stents, she was standing there with tears rolling down her face. And they wouldn't let her in because she was not family. And I just decided right then and there that I would fix that. So a month and a half or so later, on October the 30th of 2009, following this heart attack, near death experience, Julie and I flew to Las Vegas and got married by a Dracula impersonator. So
Awesome.
that was back in '09. So I mean, we've been married for 13 years now.
It
So
worked.
whatever somebody wants to make of the nature of a near-death experience, I'm familiar with the scientific explanations with the ketamine and the DMT, and all kinds of theories about the chemical changes in your brain that may produce anomalous mental experiences. But it's a subjective experience, and I don't expect anybody to accept that. It's one of those things that kind of has to happen to you personally before you'll get it. But after we were married and that was settled, I started researching the NDE material, and ran into Kenneth Ring and the Omega Project, and a lot of material out there. Dr. Eben Alexander and his experience, flatlining like he did. So eventually it got me into the subject of UFOs, and how that happened is I got invited to a ghost house. I spent the night at the Rhodes Hotel in Atlanta, Indiana, which is a documented paranormal event type of house. And I watched all the guys with the EVP equipment trying to contact the other side, and it somehow resonated with me in a way that it never did before the near-death experience. So I wound up spending several years researching near-death experiences, ghosts, cryptids, and eventually got into UFOs and discovered that it was sort of all connected. So by 2016, which was several years later, I had a bunch of notes compiled, and I thought, well, I could save people a lot of time, because I've been through a couple hundred books, and I said I could save people a lot of time and condense all this into a book that might be useful to somebody. And so I wrote Overlords of the Singularity, the manipulation of humankind by hidden UFO intelligences and the quest for transcendence. Because what I found was, in all the literature from Dr. Jacques Vallée to John A. Keel, Timothy Good, there was always this technological element that it seems like the sightings and the experiences that people were prompting us towards greater and greater technology. If you go back to the 1896-97 Great Airship Mystery, um, they were seeing dirigible type craft before dirigibles were in the air flying. And then in the 50s, you got the tin can presentations like the old Adamski style saucer. And now people are seeing these morphing, shape shifting light being type of things. So it's a reflective phenomenon, like Jacques Vallée said. And the presentations have changed over the years. So I'll be quiet now.
I don't even want to say this, but Russ, we haven't been connected on the phone for some time. I think we're connected somewhere. I'm not sure how we're connected. But yeah, sometimes it just works itself out. But well, that was my point. I wanted to because I've had some people I posted a couple topics in the last week, and it just I always remember how things are related, and why and how people think. You take cryptids and UFOs and ghosts and whatever, and there are so many people out there who think that's all related. In my mind, I always think, how can that be? But then I look at your book and all this huge amount of information, and obviously you spent a great time thinking about that. I don't even, how do you draw any conclusions with that much? I mean, it's huge. And I see how it comes across in the book, but I mean, how did it come across in your mind first off?
Well,
If that makes sense.
That's a journey in and of itself to realize that it's one big meta phenomenon. And it started out with the writings of John Keel and his research into Bigfoot. He actually went to India and Tibet and was looking for Yeti, and he heard one, but he didn't see it. And he concluded that there was two different versions from interviewing people that had had encounters with a Sasquatch or a Yeti. The first version was actually an indigenous ape that does in fact exist, that has been elusive and managed to stay uncaptured to this point in time. And the other one is the red-eyed version, similar to the Mothman appearances that he had at Point Pleasant, Virginia in 1966, where people would actually shoot at these creatures and they would disappear into a ball of light, or a luminous orb would come up and they'd kind of swoop up inside and go away real quick. So there's a paranormal version of Bigfoot. There's a fellow named John Eric Beckjord, was one of the first ones, to my knowledge, that came up with the idea that Bigfoot might be an interdimensional creature or connected to the UFO phenomenon in some fashion or another. And I think he was right. And that coordinates with what John Keel said, because a lot of times the police will be called, and the eyewitnesses will give their testimony to the police, and they'll actually find footprints, and the footprints will just disappear into nowhere. And oftentimes there's a little puddle of silicon carbide left behind for some reason. So there's trace evidences and footprints and castings that have been made. But yeah, Keel thought that there was two different versions. One was a flesh and blood indigenous ape-like creature, possibly caught on the Patterson film. I'm pretty convinced that the Patterson film is real myself. Hasn't been completely debunked, and if it is completely debunked at some point, that's fine. It doesn't negate anything. So that phenomenon, along with the Mothman encounters that people were having at Point Pleasant, followed by the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Nobody really knows why the Mothman appears the way that it does, but it seems to be some forewarning of impending disaster. A lot of people think that that's what its function is. Keel thought it was the Indian Garuda. So, yeah, there's a lot to it, and you eventually realize that it's all connected. And what really tied it up for me was Dr. Bernardo Kastrup's new book called The Idea of the World. As it turns out, the physicists are actually moving away from physicalism or material reductionism due to something that they call the hard problem of consciousness. They can't figure out how inanimate objects, no matter how you rearrange inanimate objects, you're never going to get mind or consciousness out of it. And the confusing thing for a lot of folks about that is that there are neural correlates. You can mess with the brain or put probes in the brain, and a person's perceptual experience will change. Maybe they'll lose a color or lose half of their vision. So these correlations don't necessarily imply causality. It's not that the neuron firings is causing the consciousness and the perceptual experiences, but there are correlations. Sort of like if you were messing with a TV circuit, it might mess up the picture, but the circuit inside the television is not what's causing the picture. It's actually receiving a picture from an outside source, outside invisible source, and the circuitry just serves to fine tune it into our perceptual apparatus. So they're moving from physicalism, where consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, and flipping that on its end to where consciousness is what they call the ontological primitive. That's a fancy way of saying the underlying nature of reality. So matter actually emerges from this fundamental field of consciousness. And it actually matches what Dr. Jacques Vallée, he's got a good YouTube out there called The Theory of Everything, I believe, that he said beyond physical reality, there's a field of metaphysical informational structures. And what he's describing with that is what Kastrup calls ontic pan-computationalism, where information is the ontological primitive, the underlying nature of reality. But Kastrup takes it one step forward and say there's just the quantum field itself may be conscious in some way that we don't really understand, and matter emerges from that. And there's correlations with what each physicist is saying. If you move to Italian quantum loop gravity theorist Carlo Rovelli, he wrote a book called The Order of Time that really, it took me 2 or 3 listens to get through that material, and I was Googling the whole way because he brings up a lot of things I wasn't familiar with. But his bottom line is underneath physical reality, there's a sea of quantum events, and that the physical universe actually emerges. It's an emergent phenomenon from this underlying sea of quantum events, which may in fact be conscious in some way that we don't understand. So there's a lot going on in the field of quantum physics, based 100 years ago in the double slit experiment, where they found that physical reality is actually observer dependent. If there's not an observer, it manifests as a wave, and if you bring in a conscious observer, then it collapses into a particle. So it looks like subatomic particles are in a state called superposition, which is basically two states at once. And that led me to the conclusion that the physical universe is in superposition with a larger reality that's more like a probability cloud. So our physical life is the measured, observed aspect of it, just like the double slit experiment, but yet we're connected to a larger timeless realm or a probability field, expanded state of probabilities at the same time. And that's that condition of superposition.
Interesting. So, has humanoids, have we always been involved in this, or are we just newcomers to this physical and metaphysical plane, so to speak?
Well, that's another rabbit hole, because
Of course, it
3 to
is. Yeah.
5 million 3 to 5 million years ago, the only thing resembling humans was a little 4 foot tall monkey like creature that walked upright called Australopithecine,
Right.
that had a brain the size of an orange. And then suddenly, it seems almost overnight, about 2 million years ago, uh, the Australopithecines, which there were several different species that couldn't interbreed with one another, of Australopithecine. And judging by the holes that they found in their skulls, their main function was to serve as cat food for the giant saber-toothed tigers and whatnot. They had really no environmental impact on this planet other than, a group of gorillas. And then when Homo erectus came around, that was a much taller creature with a much bigger brain. And there's a fellow named Dr. Arthur David Horn that taught at Colorado University for 14 years, and he had to quit because he couldn't buy the standard Darwinistic natural selection jump from Australopithecine to Homo erectus. And he wrote a book called Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins. He actually quit before he qualified for a pension, so that he could write this book. But somewhere along the line, the telomeres, which is the ends of the chromosomes, were fused, and the overlap, was deleted. And we don't know whether that's between Australopithecine and Homo erectus, or Homo erectus and Homo sapien. If you go to about 300,000 years ago, then you're into the Sitchin material with the Anunnaki, according to his body of information, to where humanity, it had to be Homo erectus, was genetically tweaked and combined possibly with their own stuff to make a slave race, or a real placid type creature that could do manual labor for them. Now, whether that's true or not, nobody really knows. There's some Sitchin contenders, that say a lot of his translations were incorrect. So you can think that the Anunnaki was pure mythology, or you can think that the Anunnaki were physical creatures from another world that were here, just like the cuneiform states. One of the strange pieces of cuneiform is there's a model of the solar system from about 6,000 years ago that has correct proportions of all the planets with the sun in the middle. So you have to ask yourself the question, how in the world would the ancient Sumerians, 5 or 6 thousand years ago, know anything at all about the proportions of the planets, or how many planets there were, or be able to devise a model of the solar system? And I've heard some people say that the psychedelics were in such heavy use throughout the Middle East 3 to 5, 6 thousand years ago that Terence McKenna used to think you get nature tutorials, with certain types of psychedelics, and maybe a vision of the solar system could have come through the use of psychedelics, and they put it in stone. Who knows? But then you get to about 70,000 years ago, and as Michio Kaku points out, there was a super volcano in Indonesia that went off around 70,000 years ago, and it's thought that Homo sapiens was extincted down to anywhere to 40 individuals to 2,000 individuals. And this is where the body of channeled material known as the Law of One states that beings were brought here from Mars. And I know that that sounds crazy to a lot of people that aren't familiar with a Martian genesis. But something happened to the placid Homo sapiens to turn them into the top predator on the planet and multiply like they have. And if you look into the ancient writings of Titus Livy and some of the historians, our history is a bloodbath. I mean, it's just been one war and territorial acquisition and one weapon improvement after another, until the present day. And it's been very violent and very bloody. We've been spilling our guts on battlefields for thousands of years now. So there's a fellow named William Bromley that wrote The Gods of Eden. And he started out trying to figure out what was wrong with humanity and thought maybe the wars and territorial instincts were due to poverty or, um, some amygdala function, where you have to be top dog over everybody. But what he concluded was that there was basically two different extraterrestrial factions dealing with humanity. One was very benevolent and cared about human spirituality, and the other was using humanity as a tool for their own purposes. And you can find some connecting dots with the friendship group that interacted with over 200 Italian contactees from 1956 to 1967, and they were told that we had a natural invader that was bypassing a quarantine that was set up some time ago by a federation. And these creatures enter through natural portals and bypass the quarantine, and they're subverting humankind into a technological purpose of some sort or another. So it, at some point in time, it just clicked. What they're talking about is the technological singularity. I mean, by that time, I'd read Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, so I knew what the singularity was, involving artificial or general intelligence, which is human level AI, which could easily convert itself into ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And Dr. Nick Bostrom from Oxford thinks that the amount of time that a human level AI would convert itself to artificial superintelligence was anywhere from 2 hours to 18 months. And that they might have purposes that we couldn't understand, or become what he calls a planetary singleton, which would basically run the entire planet. And then if you compare that with Rudolf Steiner's talk about beings from the eighth sphere that convert biologicals to mineral or machine, there's a lot of sources that indicate that some force or another is involved with humanity to merge us with a machine intelligence. And this freaks a lot of people out, and it's the spawn for all the New World Order, prison planet type scenarios. Lynn Kasten, thinks the reptilians are behind it, and that they're going to lock this planet down. Alana Freeland talks about the space fence lockdown, where there's going to be surveillance down to the DNA level. But through my research into the friendship group, I think we've got some benevolent beings out there that are involved with us as well. And I'd rather focus on that, for a positive outcome.
Yeah, I believe so too. I mean, there's enough negative energy in the world right now. You brought up you talked about just briefly about Prison Planet. Where do you think that notion came from, and what do you think about it? Because obviously, we're not all that bad. I don't think that it's unusual that when you put so many people in a certain area, and obviously it's not a hugely confined area, but the planet is a confined area, that they're going to find differences and they're going to find problems. They're going to look for leaders for answers, and they're not always going to get the correct answers. So, is that the idea of Prison Planet, or is it something different to you?
Well, the for whatever reason, the law of one material resonated really well with my near-death experience, because what they said was each one of us has this higher self that exists in what we call the distant future, on a sixth density. We're in third density right now. Then there's the fourth density, fifth density, sixth density, and on up. But apparently, there's beings that move through these densities, either what we would call an angelic or a positive paradigm. And then there's another set of beings that move up through the higher densities with service to self, or what we would call a negative or demonic paradigm. And these beings, fourth, fifth, or sixth density, their thing may be planetary acquisition. They may be involved in guiding a dominant predator species on a planet into developing their own technological singularity. There's something apparently that we will be inventing that will create a contact with these beings, and or they might even be able to occupy or own the planet as an acquisition. I mean, we just don't know. It's just open to speculation. But the negatively oriented, higher density beings that come through natural portals may have that in mind. And the people on this planet that are what we would call negatively oriented, that are into domination and territorial acquisition and hoarding wealth and all that, may be either influenced by or in direct contact with these higher type beings. I mean, there's a whole system of left-handed magic that's involved in invoking these types of beings and getting them to um, visit with you. Aleister Crowley, in 1917, I believe, in New York, opened up a portal and contacted that being named Lamb that looks a lot like the Greys. So there may be a whole smorgasbord of beings out there, just like there is in 3 dimensions, in the 4th, 5th, 6th dimension on up, that are what we would call positive or negative. So the positive beings from the friendship group, the W56 group, they are operating under something similar to Star Trek, the old prime directive where they don't really directly interfere. And they look for the meditators and the people that consciously seek their guidance or seek to emulate them and their oneness doctrine, so to speak. And then the negative beings, apparently their favorite activity is to take a basically good person and subvert them to the other side, with lies and deception. So it ties into Christian theology. It ties into the Quran. The Shaitan Jinn, and there's a lot of scriptures and cultural mythology around that indicates that we're not alone. In fact, I even have a suspicion that we may not be the most intelligent species on the planet. Possibly we cohabitate, with another species that isn't available to our cognitive apparatus that may be responsible for at least a portion of the UFO phenomenon. But it goes back thousands of years. Go ahead.
Do you believe that there could be some inherent danger of contact? I mean, we do have many ways we're trying to contact, and whether it be verbally, whether it be with microwaves or whatever, people are trying. And is there an inherent danger of that? Because obviously we're drawing tension to ourselves, and we could appear weak or we could appear threatening.
Well, Stephen Hawking gave such a warning. He thought so. He thought it was really stupid of us to send radio waves out there and say, hey, here we are, because we really don't know what we're dealing with out there. And we don't know if there's trade and, sort of like capitalism in space going on out there where they trade for planetary resources, or if there's creatures that would use us for food. I mean, we're completely in the dark out here on an arm of the galaxy that's out in Timbuktu. And to our science, the universe is empty, which is really strange. And there's even theories about that we're in a chrysalis universe and we're not even allowed to contact other species until we reach a certain level. And then it all opens up. We merge with our machines and become Centilects. And then we can converse with other Centilects or planetary consciousnesses throughout the universe. So there's so much more going on than what the human cognitive apparatus is built for. One of the things I'm looking forward to is augmented intelligence. Elon Musk is working on his Neuralink, and it may be such that even with the positive ETs that are out there, possibly, we may need augmented intelligence to make ourselves a billion times smarter than we are to even understand who they are or have any type of communication with them. So there's a positive aspect of the singularity where this might open us up to contact with extraterrestrials that are a lot smarter than we are with augmented intelligence. And then there's the warnings, from the negative beings that they're using humanity to either acquire planet Earth as a possession for their own purposes, and who knows what that would be. So what we can actually say that we know is that the UFO phenomenon is real, and that's really significant since the last time I talked to you, Cam. That the officialdom has come out and said they're there. We don't know who or what they are, or what they're doing here, or what they want with us, but they do exist. I mean, that's a huge step. And I've noticed just in conversation with people, and people used to think that if I started talking about UFOs, that I was crazy, and now they're saying, "Gee, maybe he's onto something." So that they're engaging in more rational conversations about the subject than they used to.
We're a species that's so unique to this planet, but we're also a species that's so unique to the universe itself. So some sort of alien creature that has come, as a time traveler or has traveled over the millennia, obviously hasn't evolved the way we did to be able to survive on this planet. So is it just an observation that they're making, or is it possible that they could actually inhabit this planet? I don't think that would be the second half of my question wouldn't be true. I mean, it'd be so hard for another species of anything to be able to come here and flourish the way we have for so long.
Well, especially if they're from another dimension, if
Right.
they're from a completely different space-time continuum, um, they may not be able to manifest here other than just temporarily, and they may need us to develop certain technologies so that they can have a physical presence here. And that may be the way that they actually travel from planet to planet, is they live in an adjacent dimension that we don't have access to. They have the ability of limited interaction with us to where they can manipulate us into the correct technologies so that they can incarnate on this planet, or cohabitate with us on this planet, or take it over, or however way you want to look at it. So there's something involved with the technology that's right around the corner that is the big key to communication with extraterrestrials and interdimensionals. Edgar Casey used to talk about the Firestone in Atlantean technology, where there was a technological device that allowed physical beings, flesh and blood beings, to talk to the other side, or to communicate back and forth with the other side. And from my own NDE experience, I know that the other side is just as real as what we think this is, but we lack the ability for effective communication. So Nikola Tesla thought that this was possible, and he worked on something called the spirit radio to contact entities, from beyond the physical universe. So there's data points that you can look at, like Tesla and Edgar Casey and Rudolf Steiner's work with the beings from the eighth sphere converting flesh and blood to mineral, to where there's some type of mergence. And that's why people are freaked out about transhumanism, because they think it's a really bad thing, that we're being manipulated by evil aliens into a transhumanist type situation, maybe for soldiers, to enter into intergalactic wars with them. There's a lot of ideas floating around, and I find it fascinating because, as I said earlier, the only thing that we really know is that these objects are real. And then beyond that, if unless you have inside information, like you're one of the UFO insiders within the deep government, it's just open to speculation. But there's so much there's so much out there in the public domain, which I was really shocked. I mean, you could easily conclude that the UFO phenomenon is real from the information by different authors that exists in the public domain, and then from there, you just have this whole treasure trove of thinking of what is this all about? What are their real purposes, their agendas? And even really conservative ufologists like Richard Dolan, who doesn't really like to speculate, he just wrote Alien Agendas, which he kind of opens up a little bit, and it totally coordinates with Overlords of the Singularity. Um, a lot of his ideas coordinate, with what I presented in the book. So I don't think that I'm too far out there in anything that I say in Overlords, because Dolan, being as conservative as he is, he's like right behind me in some of the speculation.
Yeah, I don't think that you made any wild pitches there. I think it was a pretty good comprehensive study of what other people have done. But then, I mean, I like the added touch. I mean, a lot of this stuff, and that's why I mentioned that I believe that you've been thinking or were thinking so hard on that you know, a lot of that is you. Most of it's you. Almost everything is you in there, but it's just a different twist on everything. And um I always bring up the fact to other people, it just amazes me that there are people like you who think that there's so many of these things that you know when we talk about the paranormal, there's so many things that are related. So to me, I look at Bigfoot and I look at other things and I wonder why things are so different and why they're what we why are they some sort of dimension where spirits and ghosts can pass in and out and through. But to me, from time to time, we hear stories that it sounds like that space travelers can do the same thing. So, another thing that you mentioned, and you didn't really weren't specific, but you talked a lot about time. I think that we have these points in our history where obviously there was some sort of contact because of the products that you can see still here on the planet. Um, I always wonder, I've been thinking a long time about this. I was wondering what year you were born, and were you born like in 62, 3, something like that?
I was born in
Oh,
1955.
55. So,
Yeah.
I think children of the year maybe 55 to 1975, I mean, to me it seems like an active year for people who really had experienced a lot, who've gone through a lot. I don't know if it's kind of dropped off and slowed down, but I think the folks that were born in those years obviously had something happening, and there was some experience and some contact being made with those people. I don't know what you think about that, but I think those years are significant, and I wonder why.
Well, yes, they are. You've got all the early contactees like George Adamski and George Van Tassel, who, by the way, in one of George Van Tassel's abduction experiences, he was on board with, what would be called the Nordics. I've got an echo here. And then he also reported that there was discarnate humans on board the craft that he got abducted into. So there's a little data point where beyond the veil, there are extraterrestrials and discarnate humans aboard craft, which is really strange because if you think about it, somebody 100 million light years, coming here, they're not using rocket fuel. They have to have discovered some type of hyperspace realm that we don't understand or know exists yet, or possibly overlapping with the other side of the veil where humans go when they die, or some way to avoid the time factor in order to instantaneously go to any part in the universe they want and then find a method, to slow down and then incarnate. One of the nicest sightings, in my opinion, is the Turkey UFO that showed up 3 years in a row. That Dr. Roger Lear, that's pulled alien implants out of people.
Right.
He was involved in 1 year where he actually witnessed this, and you can see two prominent little gray aliens, sticking their head out the door. But computer analysis indicates that there appears to be four beings in this doorway, where the two gray-like beings are most prominent, but there's another similar being in supine. They're doing something with this being in supine. And then behind them, there's like a mantis-like creature that seems to be in some sort of supervisory role. But the key thing with the Turkey UFO sightings is that each year they show up, they're doing exactly the same thing. So what does that tell you? That tell you they are not in the same time sequence that we are in. And John Keel talks a lot about this with when people have encounters with non-human intelligence or ufonauts that have landed and the creatures come out. They ask, "What time is it? What time is this?" So anytime you're traveling out there in space, you're traveling through time. And that's the value of Dr. Carlo Rovelli's book, The Order of Time, because it'll give you a really good foundation of what time is and how it works, and it's pretty mind blowing. Like time flows slower on the surface of the earth than it does in the mountains. And science, the way that we operate our science, it's based on presentism. In other words, the past is gone, the future is yet to be. So the only thing that's really real is our point of contact with the present, which only lasts about a tenth of a second. So even what I just said is already gone. It's not even considered real anymore. So it really begs the question, what is real? And our experience of time is based on two things. It's a local experience because we all live on most of us live on the surface of the planet. So we all experience time similarly. And it's because we have the Homo sapiens sapiens brain configuration. And according to Carlo Rovelli, time is a perception. That time itself really doesn't exist, that it's actually a perception while we're here in physical bodies. And I always wondered about that. It's like, how could a hummingbird or an ant or a bee, keep track of all its little tiny instantaneous movements? But from their perspective, from their cognitive apparatus, a hummingbird may be taking a casual stroll, and slowly moving its wings up and down. It's just that we see it happening really rapidly. So nowhere in the universe is our experience of time the same. So somewhere out there in the universe, there would be somebody whose present moment intersects with a day in you or I's life when we were 4 years old. So does our 4-year-old self still exist? Well, apparently so. I mean, if there's somebody in the universe whose present moment intersects with that day in our life when we were 4, that means we're still there in some weird way. And that's what all the physicists are saying is the block universe theory. What they're coming up with is the past, the present, and the future are all happening simultaneously, and our intersection into this particular epoch, this particular date and time, is just a perception.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I like the analogy with the hummingbird because that's exactly right. So, I think we become this society that we don't really like to spend a lot of time anymore involved in any one or specific thing. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, but we're living in, a world with 20-second sound bites. Um, Whereas if you had the society that what I believe as space travelers who've been out there, um, most possibly for generations, their generations, whatever that means. And that would seem to me that, there's some sort of interest in space travel, or maybe it was a necessity, but, that kind of livelihood would require an exceptional amount of time and possibly, time where, um, not much happens. However, I know there's this school of thought out there that you can jump these time gaps or wormholes or whatever. But when did we lose this concept of time, and why is that? I mean, it seems that that could be possibly to our own detriment, that we're not willing to take the amount of time to figure things out, and we just want to go out there blindly when it could possibly be something that hurts us. My questions are long,
Yeah,
Russ.
we,
Sorry.
we just don't know. It's the same thing as when we didn't know if there was other continents, and people just got on a ship and they went to another
Right.
continent, fearing that they might fall off the edge of the world. If they thought the world was flat, as we don't really know what's out there. But one thing you can rest assured about is that anybody flying around out there that is effectively traveling through the universe, it's one of two things. They're either beings that have moved up the ladder, so to speak, into these higher density realms, and they no longer need to take on a physical body, or they have access to all points in the physical universe all at once, or they've merged with machines and become amortal. Now, there's a difference between immortal, which means you live forever, and amortal, which means you can still have an accident. If you upload your consciousness into a robot, you're amortal because you can still be killed. You can still wreck or have an accident or be killed, but unless that happens, you're amortal. So to effectively travel through the physical universe, you would just about have to merge with machines because these bodies only last 70 years.
Right.
So if you're going to go out there for 1 million years and travel to Andromeda and the Sombrero galaxy where the mantis people are allegedly from, and all these different galaxies, these 200 trillion galaxies or however many's out there, you're going to have to merge with technology to stay in the three-dimensional realm in order to effectively travel and have a technological way to elevate the vibration of your atoms or something to go into some sort of hyperspace realm, to where all points in time and space are available, and then you materialize, wherever it is that you want. Um, I don't know if you've ever listened to Bashar, but he's Daryl Anka. He channels
Hmm.
a being which he even admits might be a future version of himself. And he says that every point in time and space has a mathematical formula to it. So it may be that in their craft, they just plug in the coordinates and they're just instantaneously there. Um, any technology that would effectively travel throughout this universe would seem like magic to us right now. I mean, we wouldn't even understand it.
Do you think we've stopped evolving at all? Don't you think we're changing our own
Oh no, I
world,
think
and
that we're in the
atmosphere?
middle of
Go ahead.
we're in the middle of a speciation event.
You have to explain
If you
that.
look around 1961,
Hmm.
where all the abductions started happening with Betty and Barney Hill,
Right.
the cattle mutilations, the tissue harvesting events happened at exactly the same time frame, from like the early 60s to the late 70s, throughout the 80s to the present. And so there's an Israeli author named Yuval Noah Harari. He accidentally wrote a bestseller called Sapiens. A friend of mine at a campground I belonged to recommended me that book. So I went forward after I read Sapiens and read his latest book called Homo Deus. And he thinks that we're on the verge of a speciation event. And so does abduction researcher David Jacobs. Now, he has a very negative take on it, that, we're being genetically modified so that aliens can take over the planet. But that's not the only narrative. That just may be his temperament, that he just has a paranoid temperament and he looks at it like that. It may very well be more along the lines of abductees Jim Maroney and Philip Kraft, who was a LA reporter for 30 years before he was abducted. And they both basically said this is an intervention. So from the time that we set off the first nuclear bomb, we may have gotten the attention of some either interdimensional or extraterrestrial civilizations, or both. And they may have taken it upon themselves for the salvation of the planet, so that we don't stupidly extinct all flora and fauna on this planet that may have had great effort in terraforming efforts for thousands or millions of years. We don't know. So they may have tweaked the genetics to where we're a little bit less violent and we're more intelligent, an IQ increase. But there's a lot of theorists out there that think that we're in the middle, or on the verge of a speciation event, that we're about to become something completely different. And that go ahead.
I'd kind of like to think of us as in the driver's seat, though. I don't think we give credit to where credit's due. We're pretty intelligent species, and we've come up with some great ideas. And in a short time, when we're talking about time, 50, 100, or I'm sorry, 50 to 100 years isn't that long, and things have happened pretty dramatically,
Oh
technologically.
yeah, sure. In 1997, the best computer program we had was a chess playing
Right.
computer program, that beat the world champion chess player. So from 1997, fast forward 20 years,
Mhm.
we've got D-wave quantum computers that are accessing resources in parallel worlds. And that moves, there's two subjects that come to mind from this conversation we're having. Number one, there's a split right now in the pro-transhumanist people and the transhumanist phobic people. There are people like William Henry, and I could list a whole host of researchers that believe that our best bet is an organic ascension, that we should shun merging with technology. And the Indian gurus that have achieved their rainbow bodies and achieved another level of existence organically, without the use of any technology whatsoever, that is the route to go. And they are very much against the transhumanist movement that's upon us. Um, the jury's out in my book because I'm already a transhuman. I've got two little metal tubes in the back of my heart, or I would have died in 2009.
I have
So
one.
yeah, so I mean, we're already transhuman in an
Right.
extent, but transhumanism would be a good thing if it improves people's intelligence, our understanding of reality, replaces limbs that were damaged or destroyed with prosthetic limbs that operate from our mind,
Right.
lets the blind see, the crippled walk. I mean, you're talking about miraculous stuff in the upcoming transhumanist technology that's going to become available. And yes, it's going to become available to wealthy people at first, you know, and that's going to be a weird situation that Yuval Noah Harari points out in Homo Deus. Is pretty soon there's going to be non-augmented people sharing the planet with augmented people who are smarter than we are, with the same way we're smarter than an ant.
Hmm.
So I mean, how strange is that going to be?
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that we kind of touched on the last time we talked, um, again, stuck with me, um, was, I'd asked you, was the event in your life where you were literally gone for a while, was it life changing? I mean, obviously it was, but for me it wasn't. And I don't know what the difference there is because we both had similar events. I mean, I was gone for a lot less longer than you were, and for me it was in 2005. But for some reason it wasn't life changing for me, and that's something that I always kind of regret. So wasn't I gone long enough, or non wasn't deserved of
Eh,
having that same experience?
no, I don't think it has anything to do with deserving it.
Yeah.
I mean, I stood there in my yard when I knew I was having a heart attack,
Mhm.
to the point where I knew if I didn't do something about it immediately, I was going to join this group of beings that gathered close to me, and I wasn't going to be here in the world anymore. But what changed my mind about that, when they presented to me that I had a choice, but I better get with it, if I was going to live and get myself to the hospital, and I drove myself to the hospital, um, was the fact that the biggest thing on my mind when I thought I was crossing the veil was that there were relationships I had with people that were here on earth that I had caused harm to. And it was just it was a form of grief that I can't even explain to you in words. And I set about to fix it. So one of the reasons I decided to stay, and I'll get to the crux of your question of
Right.
why I may have had an experience and why you didn't in a little bit, but that's the way it was for me. I just had this incredible grief that I needed to fix, and for me to fix it, I needed to stay here. So since '09, I've worked on a few of these issues that I had with people in my past, and I've got them pretty much worked out. So my next exit point, I won't have that deep grief because I've done everything within my power to correct what was bothering me when I was dying from a heart attack. So my next exit point, let's say I have another heart incident, and they tell me if we don't do a quadruple bypass, you're going to die. I'm probably just going to tell them to let me go, because I know that death isn't the end, and I know that my friends are waiting for me in this larger reality that I encountered briefly as a glimpse. But one of the things that experience did that may be a difference is, you asked me when I was born in 1955. In 1961, when I was 6 years old, I had a encounter with what we today would call two shadow people, and these this experience has stuck with me. I'm 66 now, and I've thought about it every day, just about, or at least every week, and since I was 6 years old. That my mother turned the light out, and she went in. She left me to go to bed. I was 6 years old, and I remember laying there staring at the ceiling with the lights off, and I saw something out of my peripheral vision. And I turned my head to the right, and there, standing in my room, was two silhouettes of two individuals that were so black that it was like a black hole. I mean, light wouldn't even escape from it. And I have thought my entire life, was that a photo after effect from my mom turning the light out? And if that was the case, I don't think it would have been branded into my memory like it did. And then there was another little encounter a few years later in 1966 at the age of 11 when I was in Titusville, Florida, going down the driveway. And I looked up and I saw two uh, pewter and bronze colored, what you would call flying discs. There was about five of them. I don't know, remember the exact number. And they were just so still and hovering in the air that it was almost like somebody just painted them into a painting. And my reaction at the time as an 11-year-old was to fall to my knees and weep because I was afraid they were going to leave without taking me with them. I wanted to go home, so to speak. So that's another memory that just I didn't know where to put it. So I just filed it in the back of my head. And then in 1979, as I elaborate in the book, I had a possible abduction experience with a female friend named Mary. And we were disconnected for 33 years until we were able to talk about that night where we had about 5 or 6 hours of missing time. So contact with non-human intelligence may be the norm, not the exception. I mean, it may be such that millions and millions of people have contacts every day with non-human intelligence. There's an organization that Dr. Edgar Mitchell started called the Free Organization that Raniero Hernandez took up the ball on that. And they're doing extensive studies on contactees, or they call them experiencers now. But that was the one thing that John Keel said that science really dropped the ball is by not examining the experiencers. So that's what they're trying to do. And by and large, they coordinate with John Mack's material that encounters with non-human intelligence is predominantly a positive experience. But I really can't answer that question other than maybe I pushed the limit a little bit because I knew I was dying. I stood there in my yard. I was enjoying the company of these etheric beings, and I very much wanted to become to cross the veil and become familiar with them, because I got a positive ID on several of them. But it was almost like I Googled Russ is dying into the universe, and then associated links kept popping up with the most familiar one first, because the first wave of these beings were people that I knew, some of whom were still living their physical life, which really puzzled me for a long time until I familiarized myself with physics and learned the concept of superposition. But I'm guessing that it was a time factor. When you realized you had a heart attack, did you immediately go on an ambulance and go get it fixed?
No, I wasn't. I was sick for a long time, for like a year. Just felt terrible all the time. So what had happened with me was, I had gone to a doctor on a Friday afternoon, and they said something about. Well, somebody asked me, "Do you think?" To me, it felt like I was having bad stomach problems, and somebody asked me if it could be my heart, and I said no. And so I walked out of the doctor's office and I turned around and I said, well, you know what? I take that back. So when was the next time they could get me in and check my heart? And they said it was the next day. So they put me on a treadmill in the hospital. And that's when things started to go wrong. I just felt like that, my whole upper torso was just becoming paralyzed the more I walked on this treadmill. And more people started coming in the room, and somebody handed me a glass of water and an aspirin, and I said, oh, here we go, because they were actually looking at my heart via ultrasound. So they took me into the catheter lab, and said they were going to take a look, and I could see my heart up on three huge monitors, and it was about 3 feet tall, and I could see where the block was. I mean, it didn't take a genius to recognize that. And the more agitated I got, the more distress I was in. So when they actually went in there, I told them, I have about 3 breaths left and I'm done, because it's so hard to breathe right now. And that was because they were inserting that. And, I was out for a while, and, it just, it, your brain can't go without that usual amount of oxygen, or even the minimal amount that we sometimes or don't often experience. So it was pretty intense. And, I came back fairly quick, but I was fully convinced, that was it and I was gone. So, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm picking up as I'm listening to you is it might be a difference in immediate trauma because, I mean, when I started my mower up and I started pushing it, it was like somebody hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. I mean, I knew what was
Right.
going on. I mean, it was just like boom, like you just expect to like pop out of your body if anything exists after this existence. So I just stood there and kind of absorbed what was happening. And then I got this download that I had a choice, but I had to make up my mind pretty quick. And that's when I went into the house to get the keys and drove myself to the hospital and elected to have a couple of stents put in. But that would be my guess on the difference because it seems like your syndrome happened over a period of time and it happened under controlled circumstances when you were on a
Exactly.
treadmill, whereas mine was just kapow, just like, breaking a jar, dropping it on the ground, and boom, it's gone. I was a goner.
Yeah. I would have to say that over, maybe 4 months prior to that, I did have several occasions where um I knew there was something big happening there, but it was obviously, I couldn't really recognize it for what it was because people have such a different um it feels, you know, quite a bit different, from person to person and it depends on how bad, you're really having it and how bad that heart is. But yeah, it was a crazy time and I definitely don't want to do that again anytime soon.
Well, one of the reasons that I'm glad I took the stents instead of the crab cracker operation is the crab cracker is my ace in the hole.
Right.
The technology of open heart surgery has no doubt improved since '09. I
Certainly.
mean, it's 2021 now. So I feel like I made the right choice because my stents have lasted, what, 13 years now?
Right.
And if I have another heart incident, then I'll have to make that choice. And I'll try to stay in touch with how I'm really feeling about it at the time. If I really know I'm going to exit, because I've got a couple of canines that I'm really attached to, that I love telling them I love them every day, and they came into my life, and I wouldn't necessarily want to leave them. Or Julie, I mean, she could handle it better than dogs. They just wondered, I was
Yeah.
gone, and she'd probably be glad to get rid of me in some ways. But it's so it strains at the age of 6, at the age of 11, at the age of 24. I've had all these like brief glimpses with a different world, a different reality, and then it culminated in 2009 when I had this really powerful experience. And to any of the skeptics, I run into skeptics on atheist pages and just different Facebook groups that I belong to, and they're saying like, "Dude, you had a hallucination. It was a dream," and all like that. And I tell them it doesn't even bother me, that you're saying that, because number one, I would never expect another person to believe my word on a subjective experience. I mean, even Whitley Strieber says that, with his communion experience, is that this is just a subjective experience that I'm reporting to you, and you can make of it what you will. I don't
Yep.
expect anybody to believe me verbatim. And also, let's say the skeptics are right, and when the heart was insulted and the brain had a lack of oxygen and DMT was flooding my system and adrenaline and all that. Um, I still have a hard time understanding why that would completely change my sphere of interests and the things that I was prompted to research into, and my discovery of the UFO phenomena, that's actually real, which has now been validated by officialdom. So I've delved into a lot of bodies of material that I resonate with. That had I not had that near-death experience, I wouldn't resonate with it. I'll give you an example. The Seth material. I read. I've got the audio version of Seth Speaks from 1971, where Jane Roberts went into a trance and channeled this being that called himself Seth, and he said a lot of things that I actually think are true, like your physical life is just a fleshy extension of your dreaming self. That sort of hit home, and he had some things to say about the UFOs that we see in the sky that materialize and dematerialize. And also, Dr. Michael Newton's Journey of Souls material is a really good body of information of what he did was hypnotize people in between lifetimes and found that cross-culturally they give him similar reports, about the life review, and some of them talk about extraterrestrials, that they actually have relationships with extraterrestrials in between lifetimes. And so then, you get into the area of reincarnation. Now, the University of Virginia is trying to come up with a formal theory of reincarnation based on about 2,500 cases in which children reported to their parents that they had another life in another town. The parents actually take the initiative to go check it out, and it all checks out. So some people think that that's a memory of a prior lifetime. And then there's an alternative explanation in Dolores Cannon's material called Keepers of the Garden, where everything that everybody experiences is like on a hard drive that they call the Akashic Records. And beings that are looking to incarnate on a particular planet can examine these records and absorb the life experience of, say, Cleopatra, or whatever life they're interested in, to kind of give them a prepper course before they incarnate on a particular planet like Earth. And this would explain why sometimes in hypnotic regression, past life regression, that various people around the world have claimed to be the same person. Well, it may
Right.
very well be that they weren't actually that person. It's just that they reviewed the Akashic Records and absorbed a particular historical person's life experience and had that information in their psyche when they came into this realm.
Interesting. So, in the news just recently in the last week, and we were talking about um, artificial intelligence. I wouldn't think that intelligence, if we're creating it, doesn't have to be a super intelligence, and it's not going to be a super intelligence immediately. So there's going to be an evolution in that. But I'm speaking specifically of these University of Vermont Tufts and Weiss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering at Harvard, and they discovered an entirely new, I guess, life form of biological reproduction, and applied their discovery to create kind of a first ever self-replicating robot. Are we near a breakthrough of biological artificial intelligence, and what are the implications of biological intelligence as opposed to some sort of computer interactive intelligence?
Well, that brings up a whole host of moral considerations that need to be discussed openly. There's a woman named Suzanne Gildert, who's the CEO of Sanctuary Incorporated, and her company's mission statement is to provide sanctuary for sentient artificial intelligence before releasing them into the general public. So when people are starting companies like that, that kind of gives me the impression that somewhere in some of these labs, they're a little bit more ahead of things than what the general population thinks.
Correct.
That they may have discovered, human cloning may have already been done. Synthetic life forms may have been done. It's funny because I like getting on Stephen Meyer's page. He wrote Darwin's Doubt, and he's pretty much a fundamentalist Christian that is an advocate for ID, intelligent design. And I know I frustrate him because I I tell him that I'm on board with intelligent design. There's a good case to be made that this is an intelligently designed universe, but that doesn't validate anybody's religion. It doesn't validate the Bible or the Quran or Hinduism or Jainism or any of the thousands and thousands upon religions and deities that are worshipped on this planet. To me, these are all personifications that have all too human qualities, usually, that people attach themselves to. So, the bottom line on intelligent design is, if in fact this physical universe is an intentional work of Planck technology created by some intelligence that we would understand if they appeared in front of us, we just don't know. And people adhere to these various religions thinking that they found the one true saving faith. And just within Christianity, there's 20,000 sects that all believe they're the one true saving faith, and they all have bitter disagreements with one another. So just because the universe was created by some kind of a super intelligence, that's still an open question or an open area of exploration. It doesn't validate any current existing theology or existing deities.
Do you think that artificial intelligence will be significant in the future, or will we adapt and become super intelligent ourselves and we won't need that?
Well, that's a really good philosophical question, and I would recommend a book called The Sentient Hypothesis. Alex Baikalov is resuscitated early Russian cosmism,
Mhm.
and he's got some really interesting takes on that. He's very pro transhumanist. He talks about the transhumanist political party, and his theory is that we're already starting our merge with AI. I mean, look at how addicted people are to their cell phones. They can't even go 5 minutes without them. And the virtual reality world is next, and the internet. Some people believe may become sentient in and of itself at some point. And if we actually merge with something like the internet, or the noosphere is what they call it. There's the Earth's atmosphere, and then beyond that, the noosphere, is that we could all merge into a single entity that Alex Vikolov calls the Syntellect. So, I mean, there's some really far out thinking by some really smart people that are writing books about this very subject. That's just a vast area of philosophical and intellectual exploration, but the morality of it is stunning. I mean, you talk about cloning a human being or creating a unique life form, with our own hands. I mean, if we're only 200 years into technology, it's not beyond the pale of possibility that this universe could be somebody's creation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really enthusiastic about the prospect of, just developing life for the sake of science, rather than for some actual purpose. We've looked, we've seen the future and how we are unable to adapt to certain things like viruses and things like that, and it happens slowly. I'm sure it happens, but it happens slowly. And do you think that we're constantly on the verge of extinction? I mean, there's so many things playing against us on this planet, and yet we seem to overcome a lot.
Yeah, we're on our own. We're in the middle of a shooting gallery, like astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson says. We've got to figure out a way to deflect asteroids. If anything comes around 5 or 6 miles wide that has a direct impact on the Earth, you can pretty much kiss all life on the planet
Right.
goodbye. We're in dire straits as far as self extinction with thermonuclear annihilation. There was a book written back in the 90s by Jonathan Shell called The Fate of the Earth. And half of the book goes into what actually happens if there's a moderate nuclear exchange on this planet. And it is bad. I mean, it is really bad. Typhoid in the water from corpses floating in it, to nitrous oxide going into ozone and destroying the ozone layer, radioactive fallout. It could easily extinct all biological life on this planet, even with a simple exchange, say between Russia and the U.S. We play battleship, for one day and it's over. So we are a prime species that is in need of an intervention. If you ask me, I like to look at these abductees like Jim Moroni and Philip Kraft, where they've been told by the beings that they encountered that they care about humanity and they're intervening in humanity to make us a little bit less violent, a little smarter, because this threat of thermonuclear annihilation will never go away. Because we could get rid of all the nuclear bombs, but we still have the factories that can make them, and they'd be right back into production. You can destroy the factories. Well, there's people with the knowledge to reproduce that. I mean, once that is out of Pandora's box, you can never really put it back in. So from now to eternity, the human species, as long as we are alive, will be dealing with an imminent nuclear threat at our own hands. And that's probably, I would say, right up there in the top priority right now, is to address that, because all of these nuclear countries have thousands, of nuclear weapons, and it only takes a couple of them to end everything. What really got to me, I don't want to get too political in this discussion, but in watching the footage from the January 6th uh, tourist visit or insurrection, however way you want to look at it, when they whisked Mike Pence out of that room to take him to safety, the guy with the nuclear codes in a suitcase was right behind him.
Right.
And it's like I watched that, and my jaw dropped. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah. I think that, I'm a person who lived, through those movies that came out in the 80s and the day after and whatever. And that was always on my mind. And it always has been since then. And that was one that really weighed heavily. But even now, it's things change because, I mean, obviously, we've just seen how fast a virus can mutate and change, and this one, of course, isn't as deadly as some, and some of those really deadly ones like Ebola, were super contagious, but not like, what we're seeing with COVID. So, there's that, and there's just, there's objects hurtling through space, and lucky, Venus and Jupiter can, absorb some of those from time to time, and they've kind of cleaned up our solar system of some of these huge objects over the past millions of years that should have struck us, and because of their huge gravitational force. But there's just so many things, and obviously I don't want to sit around and just be afraid all the time and think of this. But um, are there any other instances that or examples that you think of that could, other than viruses and
Oh, sure.
nuclear
I mean,
war?
there's a super volcano right here in the
Oh
United
yeah, yeah, yeah,
States.
yeah.
If that goes
Just
off out
south of
west,
me.
I mean, we're pretty much done for as a
Yeah,
country.
yeah,
And the viruses, one of the things that is a big problem right now, and it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong about this, but there are people that just absolutely do not trust medical authorities. So, um, I, for one, the choice that I've made is, I'm double vaxxed, back in March. I just got my booster last week because I'm operating with the best of what I know.
right,
And but even if something really, really uh, terrible came out of the pack, I mean, might be a method that we could all get on board with real quick that would fix it. But the way the population is right now, and the polarization and the different cognitive paradigms that people operate under, I don't think everybody would be on board with it. So, I mean, that faction of the population could doom us right there.
right. Yeah, and fortunately, a lot of these things that have happened over the last 100 years, we had a little bit of time on our side too. But I don't know how we could live as a society and knowing what we know and doing what we do, um, through another black plague or something similar, because um, you know, having a bacteria or a virus wipe out 20 to 50% of the population just seems like it would paralyze the whole system
Sure.
immediately.
Yes, we're going to have to come up with a completely different paradigm. And this is where you get into the area where people start going, now, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You're talking New World Order stuff, you know, because our current economic paradigm, the way that we deal with money and material possessions and a response to emergencies and everything is insufficient.
Right.
Something like you're describing, Cam, come along. I think we'll go extinct. And you know what? Even if this universe is a creation, it's a creation by an intelligence that thought predation from the microscopic level up was fine and dandy, which is kind of frightening. And if humans extinct themselves, this universe will go on without a whisper. I mean, it's the nature of this reality is it just moves on. This will be a dead planet for so many millions of years, and maybe life will emerge on it, maybe not. And that's another really huge area that's fascinating is where did life come about on this planet to begin with in the first place?
Yeah, where did it?
You've got, yeah, I mean, Francis Crick, the discoverer of the DNA helix, believes that DNA is a technology. Francis Crick said there's absolutely no way that DNA could have just like formed itself somehow from a cosmic soup. So he believed in panspermia. And if you look at the heavy bombardment period in the ancient past of Earth, we were bombarded by meteorites for millions of years. And if organic material can somehow go on board a meteorite, there was plenty of time in the bombardment period of Earth for organics to arrive here and take root.
Right.
And if there's an intelligent civilization out there that seeds other planets through this panspermia process, that's a kind of hopeful thought to me, because that means they might be human too. If they sent DNA to this planet that would eventually become human, maybe we have cousins out there. Maybe the human form is ubiquitous throughout the universe. We just don't know. It's this is like an episode of Lost.
Yeah, it is exactly. What about the fact that we struggle so much with our origin? And again, that's super important to us. But um, I think this discovery or this study of our own origin has led to a lot of false flags and things like that. There's so many people that have come up with so many different ways this could have happened, but I think that's to a fault, really, because um, I think there's guys like you and me who we may be way off base, we might be right on, but we don't know. I mean, who's the expert, and how do we decide how to explore this question of origin? Because that's one of the biggest questions that we have, and it is so hard to study this and figure it out because of what we've become, and all these guesses that we're really making without a lot of science. Although we do have a lot of science, and there's a lot of research going on, but it just seems like we're going off into so many directions. What do you think the solution is to try to put the brains together and come up with something that's probable instead of
Well, that
something
is the
crazy?
solution, to put our brains together. John Keel did a famous quote. He said, "Belief is the enemy,"
Right.
because as soon as you're invested in a particular belief structure, the truth could come along and smack you in the face and you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
Since I was about 13, I've suspected that there was more to Darwinian evolution than natural selection and random genetic mutation. That just didn't seem right. That seemed like building a computer with a sledgehammer to me. And just recently, and there's videos out on this, they're discovering quantum computing processes in cellular biology. So it may very well be on a microscopic level that there's these quantum computing processes that allow a particular organism to functionally interact with its environment and make positive adjustments that are in that uh, entity's best interest to be able to be a better fit for a particular ecological niche. In other words, evolution may be real, but it may go way beyond the processes that up until now we thought were involved. Because with natural selection and random genetic mutation, it just doesn't seem like you would get the wide variety of life, 27 million species on the earth. And with the Cambrian explosion 500 million years ago, there was apparently there was about 36 phyla that just showed up almost immediately. And there's an astrobiologist named Dr. Ron Joseph that claims that the DNA for every future form was contained within these 36 original phyla. So, did these phyla in the Cambrian explosion surface really rapidly by our way of looking at things because the process was in place after a long, long period of time, like 3.5 billion years? Or did somebody actually seed the planet from elsewhere with the original phyla that they knew that once they left, these organisms would take off and develop over millions of years and eventually, become an intelligent species? There was a guy back in the 50s, an early AI researcher named John von Neumann, who said the most likely form of life that we would find out there in the universe is what came to be known as a von Neumann probe, a self-replicating von Neumann probe. And biological life, if panspermia is correct, and we were seeded by an extraterrestrial civilization, either in raw form with the 36 phyla that immediately showed up at the Cambrian explosion or occasional interventions since then, um, biological life itself might be a von Neumann probe to replicate an alien species that exists in another galaxy. And this is just how it's done. They send the organic material out, the meteorites bombard foreign planets, and they know that it's an automatic process that once this life takes root, these quantum computing processes and cellular biology take over, and pretty soon, not pretty soon, over millions of years, you've got an intelligent species. And that brings up the question, okay, if that's going on, and if life arrived at this planet through panspermia from an extraterrestrial intelligence, did they have a purpose to it? Maybe so, maybe not. But I've always thought, as an agnostic, back prior to my NDE and everything, that if this universe was actually created by an intelligence, they based it on algorithms of predation. So why in the world did they do that? It's just an open question.
I've always thought, and my mind is changing gradually, but that we would not evolve, that we would actually modify our environment and change our environment so we could thrive without, any dramatic changes in our morphology and physiology. But, I do think that we're going to reach a point of diminishing returns. It seems that that our environment is changing faster always, and I grew up through the 80s and the 90s, and I knew that the environment was changing. But when that speeds up, we're going to reach a point where it's going to be a lot harder to go backwards. So maybe there's people have theories that maybe what we're seeing is ourselves from the future that have come back to make things different or observe whatever. But I certainly don't think that we're capable of changing our environment in a positive way where we're going to live and be more successful.
Yeah, there's a lot involved with that. There's a really sweet UFO researcher, Diane Tessman. Yeah, we're
Yeah, I know Diane.
Facebook friends and stuff. You know Diane?
Sure.
And she thinks along those lines. And
Right.
then you have Susie Hansen, who feels that she's possibly cohabitating with a gray by agreement prior to this lifetime. And that actually ties into Whitley Strieber's stuff, because when he first had an encounter with these beings, he'll tell you that the reason that he was injured rectally is his own fault, that he panicked and made sudden movements and everything. So he blames that on himself. And that's something he's had to live with. He's got the whole anal probe thing going with him. But he started out terrified, and then eventually over time he's coming to the point of view that this is a symbiosis, that there's actually a symbiosis going on with the human race and these other beings, whoever they are and wherever they're from. They seem to want to have some sort of symbiotic relationship with them. And then if you look at the Betty Andreasson abduction, she was told that the Greys are that humans are the larval form of the Greys. So if Betty Andreasson was told that humans are the larval form of the Greys, and Leonard Stringfield, in his research with crash retrievals, thinks that some of them are not organic, that they're actually robots. I mean, who knows? Maybe at some point in the future we do merge with technology, and maybe it's a mistake, and they're coming back to fix it, or maybe they want to tweak something on this timeline, and then you get into multiple timelines, because if in quantum physics there's something called the Schrodinger equation. It's the wave
Right.
function of the universe, and if it unfolds without the introduction of any variables or weirdness, uh, reality's constantly decohering from itself. And even physicists like Sean Carroll, who's a complete physicalist, thinks that there's an infinite number of himself out there in the universe somewhere. So then that's a big question. If I've tried to contact him, but I never get a response. But the question that I would ask him is like, okay, if you know that there's an infinite number of yourself out there on these infinite number of timelines, and this version of you dies, wouldn't your consciousness just switch, from the one that in this life to a different one? And like all memory of this life would be erased, and you just like wake up on this other timeline and you just never know the difference. And I've thought about that recently. It's like I could wake up in the morning as a 3-year-old child in Titusville, Florida, and just wake up and interact with the reality that I know. And the memory of this life that I think I've lived for 66 years could be completely erased, and I would never know it. I'd just wake up as a 3-year-old in Titusville, Florida, and just go
Right.
on with my day.
So you mentioned a symbiotic relationship. I would have to agree with it. There's some sort of symbiotic relationship, but I don't think it's a mutualistic symbiosis of some kind. Well, it could be, but I don't think we're benefiting from it. Even though it may be something, um, a symbiosis that doesn't benefit us, in the long run, but it may be
Yeah, it's an open question.
benefiting them, whoever they are.
Yeah, the jury's out on that. If Dr. Michael Newton's material is true and we interact with extraterrestrials in between lifetimes in this hyperspace realm that we go when we die, or whatever you want to call it, Magonia or Etheria, um, and that may be their way of coming here and experiencing, human form. We just don't know. That is Nigel Kearns is another one that wrote a couple of books about the Greys, and some people think that idea is horrifying, that these are like fallen angels or demons, and they're here to take over the human race, and it's a bad thing, and we should shun transhumanism. I mean, they have legitimate feelings, some paranoid feelings about that because we don't know what we're getting into. And then there's the other people that feel much more positive about it. I mean, Susie Hansen, I've met her at a convention. She feels very positive about her cohabitation, her dual soul connection with a gray alien. And there's another fellow, William Cherney, who works with a spirit medium in Australia named Paul Ham, who is a trance medium that communicates with what he calls zetas. It's an extraterrestrial gray type race out there, and they've got several books that are available on Lulu about it at the cost of printing. I mean, it's not a money making thing; they're just putting this information out there. But their book that William Cherney wrote, called the Zeta Primer, is really good stuff. I mean, a lot of it really resonates with my near death experience, and when you get that goosebumpy feeling when you read something, it's like, oh, that's a fantastic idea. That happened all the way through that book.
Right.
So
speaking of books, I mean, do you have another one in you? I mean, it doesn't have to be as huge as the one that we're talking about tonight, but I would love to hear
yeah,
more.
I've learned several things. I learned a lot through author Nick Redford. He's written like 20 or 30 books, and they're all easy to read. They're not complicated. They're good information, and I like them. I have all of his books on my phone. I like Nick Redford, but I'm going to take a lesson from him and make it palatable to an average audience, that may not be as familiar with the UFO field as I would like for them to be, or as familiar with physics or quantum mechanics as they might need to be. Just talking about the fact that in this physical form, we seem to be connected to a larger reality, and just talk about that, more along the lines of Dr. Michael Newton or something. But yeah, I've got a PowerPoint presentation in two or three of them. One of them's UFO religions, and that's a pretty interesting one because UFOs have affected human religion quite a bit, like the Aetherius Society or the Galactic Federation, or there's a whole bunch of UFO religions. Some of them are negative, like the Heaven's Gate cult, where they all took poison because they thought they were going to, be on board a flying saucer. So that explores the history of UFOs and religion. And then the other one is my basic presentation. I've given it one time live at a convention called Stargate to the Cosmos back in 2018. Dr. Sasha Lesson and his wife Janet Lesson got me on board with going there, and I did a live presentation on that. And I may just convert that to a book, because when COVID came back, everybody's going to Zoom presentations anyway.
Right.
The live presentation just kind of took a hiatus. So I thought about just like going frame by frame and maybe elaborate on. There's 335 PowerPoint slides that could easily take half a page or so. So I found that books this would be good information for any aspiring author out there. Is that you've got to make it for a general audience. You've got to make it a readable number of pages. 545 is what my Overlords of the Singularity is. Well, not everybody wants to take on a 545 page book.
I got
And
something to say
also,
about that, though. I think that that's a book that you can just leave on the shelf. I don't keep a lot of books, and when I do, it's something that I'd like to revisit, and that's why it's in the house in the first place. You bang out
yeah,
a book and maybe you might shelve it because you want to look at it later. But I think, it's one of your books is like one of those, you're thinking about something and, did I read it there, or you pick it up and you revisit it over and over again. I like that part,
Yeah, it
it's
is
a
valuable
reference.
because that original book that I wrote in 2016, Overlords of the Singularity, that has a lot of the classic cases in it.
Right.
That I was naive at the time when I first realized that UFOs were real. Is that I thought I would document for myself every one of the classic cases since, say, 1947,
Sure.
beginning with Roswell and then go forward. And then I realized that the more I got into it, the further away it receded from me.
Yeah.
And I realized that there's thousands upon thousands of them. And it's like, oh, there's no way I could do it. Well, by that time, I had hundreds of pages. So I combined my analysis of all the classic cases, like Whitfield Childs and Cash Landrum and Steve Michalak. And, there's by decade, like from the 50s to the 60s, 60s to 70s and on up, each chapter like takes on a decade. And I cover the main classic cases in that and all the theories about what that possibly could represent. Like in the Cash Landrum case, the diamond shaped crafts that gave them radiation burns. I mean, they tore up the whole road because they didn't want that to be commonly known.
Right.
And it turns out that may have been a gifted alien reproduction vehicle piloted by humans that went wrong. And Project Red Light was called, and all the helicopters and the Chinooks came in all of a sudden. And there was more witnesses than just Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum. There was other witnesses in the town that saw the helicopters and they saw the light. So I mean, there's a lot of evidence for some of these cases and physical traces, like burns and Klieg's conjunctivitis and missing time. And the missing time thing you would expect if some of these craft provide their own gravity, and gravity has a lot to do with our perception of time. I mean, missing time just goes right along with what you would expect in an anti-gravity type vehicle if you came close to it. So, yeah, and then in the epilogue, there's one chapter there where I examine about 40 of the top UFO researchers and just do like a little synopsis of their educational background and the thrust of their research. And then it's followed up with an epilogue. But yeah, I talk about my near death experiences, how I connected it with ghosts and UFOs, and go by decade with all the classic cases, all the different theories, the intelligent geophysical theory, the interdimensional theory, all of that kind of stuff is speculative. And then wrap it up with there's something going on in this universe that appears to be intentional, that we would call like a cosmic conflict between good and evil, something along that theme that's probably just really rudimentary compared to what's really going on. But it's a really fascinating subject, and I'm really glad that I had my NDE in '09, and I'm glad that it propelled me in this direction because in the last 13 years, I've met so many interesting people. I mean, from people that will tell you that they've lived on Venus for a few years, to people that say they've been out in space for 20 years and come back. And there was once upon a time prior to my NDE, that some like my next door neighbor told me that they're part of a secret space program and they were taken out into outer space for 20 years and then returned to their body at the exact moment they left, I would have thought they were crazy. But reading books like Carlo Rovelli's Order of Time and finding out that time isn't what we think it is, and combine that with the subjective experience of a near-death experience and an encounter with etheric beings, I'm open to a lot of things now today that I wouldn't have been prior to '09, and I'm happier for it. I'm having a much better time with life than just thinking this is just a random material universe and subatomic particles is all there is, and when you die, you're dead. I mean, that's kind of bleak. And if you can move past that and go from physicalism to some form of idealism, or at least panpsychism, where you've got conscious agents at some subatomic level, and then they combine to form greater cosmic agent or conscious agents. Um, Life is, more colorful that way.
Certainly is. Are you still answering questions online if people have questions? I know you had an email address,
Sure.
Fishfang. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Is that
Fishfang at
right?
iCloud.com. And
Yeah.
that's the one that comes in on my phone. I'll be glad to talk to anybody on that. It's like a fang on a fish, FISHFANG at iCloud.com. I've got a fishbang at netzero.com, but it's on my desktop and I check it like once a year, and I know I miss a lot, so I just direct people to the one that comes in on my portable device, which I'm melded into it like it's part of me. I mean, they might as well just implant my iPhone into my body already.
Yeah, I know. That's next though, Russ. And
Yeah.
that may be where we get our our initial boost of artificial intelligence and have it just built into a filling or something like that. It's coming.
Right, because by and large, people really like these algorithms that know them better than they
Exactly.
know themselves.
Exactly. They're
You
addicted
know,
to that.
the stuff that Facebook is sending me to buy, I mean, it's my taste completely.
Right.
I didn't know I wanted to buy it until I saw
Yeah.
it, and now I want to buy it.
Yeah.
And your blood pressure, your all your biometrics, like these Fitbits that people are wearing. What they're finding is that people like this. They like the fact that artificial intelligence can collect information about your body and about your preferences to where it kind of knows you a little bit better than you do, because you might be in a mood one day and then not in the mood another. Well, these biometrics know you. I mean, they know what you are, and it's like they can make recommendations that you might misjudge and make the wrong choice. So people are talking about turning their voting over to the algorithms. Let the algorithms tell you, who to vote for, and let the algorithms tell you this and that and the other. I mean, we are merging with artificial intelligence, whether we like it or not.
Right. Giving into technology and
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be so much easier to have somebody make those decisions for us. So again, I want everybody to the book's available, and I'd love everybody if they could pick up the book, because I love the book. And um I never read the book in one sitting. I never read it cover to cover. I mean, it was always, revisiting it for like a year, jumping back and forth and taking a look at it. And it was because something always came up. And I knew I had read it somewhere, and I for some reason I always think it's your book. So it probably was. It just takes me a while to get into it and find those places where I had left off before. But it's well worth it. It's a great read. And my very patient guest, has been Russell Brinegar. And thank you very much, Russ. And hopefully we can talk again. And good luck to you. And I can't wait to hear another book or read another book. I hear them a lot now because it's so much easier in the car. But yeah, I do like the paper book.
Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I don't get a chance to talk to too many people about this subject. So when I do get the chance, I turn into a motor mouth, but I have a really good time.
This is Whitley Strieber, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
Thanks, Whitley. Thanks, Russ. And stay safe. We'll talk again. Thank you very much, and good night.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And I'd like to thank everybody for checking in tonight. It was kind of a shit show, excuse my language, and things kind of came together a little bit. But yeah, technology is sometimes hard to understand. And now that we've added video to the show, and of course there will always be an audio version, it's really there's a learning curve there. So thanks very much for checking it out. There was a couple of people who had called in. Somebody called in like 4 hours early, so that was unusual. But didn't mean to hang up on you. Didn't really understand what was going on. Didn't expect somebody to call in that early. So yeah, next week we're going to do it again, and not going to announce who the guest is because it's going to be great and amazing. So thanks everybody for checking in online, and thanks everybody for emailing. Sorry we didn't really get to a call, just played it safe and made sure that we could limp through an interview with Russ and get through it without having any more major problems. So gonna iron out the bugs a little bit. I like this a lot better than just the audio version, and I want to get as many people involved as possible. So again, thanks and good night. I see somebody named Moo has checked in, and thank you very much. And I know you all be listening to the audio version, and don't watch the video version while you're driving. So good night, everybody. Stay safe, and be sure to check out the website. We'll have stuff posted on there, and I'm always working on that. That's www.myalienlifepodcast.com. You can listen to all these podcasts on your favorite app. My favorite is Spotify. it's on Pandora. It's everywhere. It's on Apple Podcast, and check it out. And hello to everybody internationally. I have people who listen from all over the world, and it's great that you're a part of this. So thank you very much. I'm Cam Logan. Good night.